Hi, everybody. A very welcome on this series, in this series of the Going Public program. This is already the 29th in the series. And today is very special because we don't have a lecture. It's called the Going Public Lecture series, but this is not a lecture, it's a debate. In this case, it is created a discussion by one of our 5 engagements, the 4+1 engagement we call them. And this is the +1. It's a special one because it's located in Brussels. It's called the Brussels Way, curated by Patrick Moyersoen. And it really thinks about Brussels as a metropole, and it thinks about educational methods and formats, and therefore it fits very well to have this debate from, let's say, the Brussels campus.
Of architecture that we know. I think that's obvious for most, or I guess that's obvious. Since Corona came, March 2020, suddenly everything that we thought to know about the city changed based on this new fundamental principle of the 1.5 meter and the idea of to keep distance. So from that, or thinking about the street changed, or thinking about public space, or thinking about the office, the private house, everything changed. But here this evening, we want to think of how the pandemic changed our way of doing at the faculty. So how the pandemic impacted architectural education. So for architecture education, again, we had since March 2020, quite some new constraints that we were confronted with. Blijf in uw kot or stay at home was the first, I would say, new dogma. Campus life was suspended, not because the school is so much a place for contamination, but because to somehow put a stop on the dynamic that happens around the school. And all these measures or way of these new terms or the measures brought new terms and practices into being, talking about education. So now suddenly we all talk about alternating physical and online meetings. You never know when the meeting is online or in real. And we also talk about hybrid teaching forms and all these, let's say, new practices. It's quite ironical. Why? Because architecture education, especially at our faculty, has always been looking for disruptive practices, for changing the way we look to a city, for rethinking what it means to educate, etc. And suddenly, so this was always very difficult, and suddenly COVID-19 came and everything was different from one day to the other. You could call it a sort of great disruption without prior notice and with a diabolic force. Diabolic force in the sense of there was no way of discussing. It simply had to change from one day to the other. So we are past 3 semesters now of lockdown teaching. This is exactly the period that we had a few years ago at the WTC tower near Brussels North Station. So what a change today with that period. It was a 1.5 year temporary occupation of the 24th floor of the WTC building, an abandoned building. It gave us great opportunity, the opportunity to reflect upon architectural and urban production while being exactly in that most traumatic spot of the city and of Brussels. It also allowed us to reflect upon the way of architecture educations, because we were all brought together, studios and theory classes, electives on one bare floor without dividing walls. Just us with some tables and basic services. And of course, it created a lot of fun in the aperitifs after hour. Also maybe during classes, but okay, let's say it was after hour. You can read all about this in the book that was published 1.5 years on this period of 1.5 year temporary occupation of the WTC towers. So what a big contrast with today. Reflection on urban production in Brussels. Now it all happens from your own home, from your cot, and for most from your own bedroom. It also, another change is that we're back in the good old days of the school apparatus, with the teachers talking to the screen in a sort of one-way direction. From my perspective as a teacher, often talking to black screens, students reduced to a name at the black screen. And of course, with the typical frustrations of slow internet, failing to share your screen, talking while being mute, a screen that is too small to show an image, headaches after the long hours online, etc. So we have been coping with that period. And I think the debate is a wonderful opportunity now, or wonderful, I mean, a necessary opportunity to reflect upon this period. So is it a period that we should forget as soon as possible, or can we learn something from this period? Can we ever get back to normal? Or is this lockdown or the semi-lockdown the new normal? Or should we still define another normal when it comes to architectural education? Allow me to finish this introduction with a few experiences that I had, say, from my own perspective. For me, I think the lockdown was something like, it confronted me with what I would call the suburbanization of architectural education. We were all, again, back in our own bubble. I mean, the studio as a bubble and the class as a bubble. I guess it is never more clear than today that we do not know what happens in another studio, what another teacher is talking about, a colleague of mine, what other students are doing, friends of you. So we're all dispersed somehow in our own small parcel. A second experience is what I would call the generalization of the schizo-subjectivity. Teaching is not happening on one platform anymore. We're acting at different platforms at the same time. We have to talk, we have to teach through the camera, we have to follow the chat, we have to create clips, knowledge clips. We have to see all these clips. The clips are piling up upon each other. You cannot even follow all the clips and all the videos and all the recordings that are stacked in Toledo. So this is what I would call the generalization of schizo-subjectivity. We're acting at 1,000 platforms at the same time. And then third, I would say, it confronted me, this lockdown, with a geographical delocalization. I mean, with this, of course, it created a lot of frustrations, but at the same time, students of mine were, while teaching, suddenly it appeared that they were in Cairo, following classes in Brussels, which is an amazing thing, which is a sort of old dream that even a person like Luc Deleu was dreaming about 30 years ago. He was designing a sort of aircraft ship for this, what he called global education system. And now suddenly we have it with a laptop. Students can join in from all other sides. But of course, the flip side from it is that we do not know the faces anymore. I met students after class, after studio, that I didn't know that these were students part of my class or my studio. So this is the effect of a geographical delocalization. From my side, I think these were disturbing experiences and at the same time fun. experiences. Good. I want to finish with that and look forward for an interesting debate. The program for today, maybe someone can screen it, or maybe I can give you an idea of the agenda. So we will have 3 rounds of presentations. Every presentation will take around 6 minutes maximum. We will, after the presentation, maybe create space for 1 question, but the idea is first we have 3 presentations, and then, yes, here we are. So 3 rounds of 3 presentations, every presentation 6 minutes. In between the presentations, we quickly ask some most urgent question, but then in between the rounds, we take time for a Q&A, for some reflections, from some extra questions or thoughts and remarks. So this is the program for today. Please use the chat box to post questions, remarks. I think someone will provide you then with the microphone to intervene. But you're not forced. You can, of course, use the chat box. You can use other means of communication. So the first in the series is Patrick Moyerson. I would say the floor is yours, or the screen is yours, Patrick.
Hello. So in the first series, there are 3 people who will intervene. So it's myself, then it's Isabelle Benoit, and Thomas Ohm. And the idea is that everybody introduces themselves shortly. So I will do that. And then further on, Eneida, Berisha will play the role of the Master of Ceremony during this evening. So the tempo is, it's a bit up tempo, but I could share more interventions by 9 people. And I will head off with a small text I prepared. So my name is Patrick Moyersoen. I'm a practicing architect. I'm teaching in the bachelor and in the master a design studio. And as Lilet pointed out, I'm also curator for the Brussels Way, which is the engagement who took the initiative. But of course, this team engages, in fact, the whole faculty and all its members. So my intervention is called Learning in, Through and After, showing the setting of design studio. There was an article which kind of came back to my mind a lot during this period of the lockdown, especially during the first period. It was an article I read a couple of years ago in treating a field which is not the things where I normally go into, but somehow I felt on this article and it stayed in my mind. It's an article published in 2010 by the New York Times titled, "We have met the enemy and he is PowerPoint." And it's an article where General James N. Mattis, it's about the military, is quoted, "PowerPoint makes us stupid." And further on, the whole article investigates the impact of PowerPoint in decision-making during the Afghan war. And commanders, the article states, are a serious concern that the program, so the PowerPoint, stifles discussion, critical thinking, and thoughtful decision-making. So for me, it was a kind of amazing, or the first time where so clearly the impact of the medium in the way to think and to analyze very complex problems and issues of life and death, in this case, became so clear. And it was, in the article, it became clear it was a major concern in the Pentagon at that moment that all these kind of very important decisions were just made after kind of one PowerPoint after the other, and that this has an impact on the quality of the decisions. And this article came back on my mind when in March 2020, the pandemic struck, as Gideon quoted. We were locked in, and suddenly we had to scramble to reorganize the ongoing studios in a way that could work with all these new tools we were not accustomed yet. So we have to find alternative channels to organize communication between students and teachers, and somehow also we became aware of the impact of the medium on the message of the mission, and that's what I want to investigate in this little intervention. So the linear thinking, tunnel thinking that is embedded in a screen presentation, building up towards an inevitable conclusion, which was the immediate choice we did to continue the studio in the urgency of March 2020. It seems to transform the fragile process of the design studio in a fight against that by PowerPoint and further on that by Zoom. We came more aware that architectural design is an iterative process that needs an appropriate setting for discursive thinking, associative thinking, tentative thinking, dissident thinking, beside analytic and synthetic thinking. Even more fundamental is the ability to operate in a plastic way, when images and imagination become transformative tools, driving the design by opening unexpected paths to explore, adding dimensions that cannot not be rationalized or can, and installing the power of poetics central. And then an architectural design process is still not the same than a pedagogical exchange. After 2 semesters of studios with an endless streams of presentations and clumsy scrolling and typing, Miro came into view. It's a digital platform that can be considered as a big table or wall where the students spin all this material or hers material and can use this to build a narrative about the project, but then online. The great thing about Miro is that all material is always there, even more than during the live studio days, where students made a selection of material they want to bring to the studio, the things which were transportable, and the things he thought were necessary, but not the things that have the old material, the discarded trials, which often seem so crucial to understand what are the intentions, where the student comes from, and suddenly seem to play a role in new visions on the project. Students, peers, and teachers can go back and forward and dig into this material to clarify or make a point. It looks like a permanent studio, this Miro board, where everything still lingers around, and after a couple of weeks, the Miro page of the student becomes a small and dense universe. I would say also the studio is much more documented in this digital era. I have, since all the communications passed through documents, I think we end up with great stuff at the end of the studio, also allowing a lot more possibilities for post-production, for outreach with this material. I think that's a big advantage. But still missing in action in these digital rooms are the students, the colleagues, the walking around a model, the smell of glue in the morning. And I think that is also a point, the act of the making. I think the act on itself is part of the learning trajectory and should take place in the studio. We were looking during this period to give this, to reinvent this act of making, and as a kind of an antidote of the digital constraints by physically making things, but also as an antidote of the lockdown and the social distancing. And find a way which allowed to make something collective and to make something real. And therefore, and I will just show some a small image, if you allow me.
Apologies, Patrick.
Yes.
Just remind you to wrap up.
Okay, I will. So, therefore, we invented the format of a politics, which is where each student had a panel and worked on its individual, but by a certain set of rules, we made something which could be considered as a collective work. It's dealing with the contemporary rights of passage in the city without a majority. I think awareness grew how we operate. The medium matters as the setting matters. Efficiency was found, the coffee is still missed, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Maybe there's time for one question. Someone should. If not, we wait for the Q&A. You were drawing this parallel with war. The PowerPoint is unfit for war, you said. But is architecture education a war, or is the pandemic a war?
I think, well, the complexities of where we're dealing with in architecture. Maybe I'm not a specialist in the military, far from that. But I think it's about the complexities and the way how these processes are managed.
Okay, we're urged to keep the speed going by Thomas. Yes, Thomas. Thank you for intervening here. Isabel, you're next.
Okay.
Open the microphone. You open the video.
Start my video. Yeah, you can see me.
Yes. Hello.
Hello. Can I share my screen? I think I'll just try. Yeah. Okay. Do you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Isabel Benoit. I'm a student counselor from Brussels, and I also have colleagues in Ghent, Nathalie, Catherine, and Julie. And yeah, I was asked to present a view of student counselors. What is the effect of Corona on the students, and how do we perceive these their problems? Going to the next slide. This is, for me, this is a metaphor of a student during Corona, but I will get back to it at the end of my presentation. I was asked to join this program, I think, this project, because I wrote a letter to the students of our faculty, and I compared them to a chair. I talked to my colleagues, and as student counselors, we often discuss, of course, the impact of Corona on students, because the solitude and the uncertainty are just two very main things that are always coming back. As you can see on the slides, there's the uncertainty about the future in general, what will happen, but also about the educational system. They never know what's going to happen next, you know, how are the exams going to be. So it's all very short-term decisions. And yeah, that makes it very uncertain for them, and this makes them very uncomfortable. There's a lack of daily structure. They often talk about that has a huge impact on productivity and motivation. Courses are online, they can watch whenever they want. Sometimes they can't, but sometimes they can. They have to watch a lot of online courses, and it's very tiring. They also complain that they are always, you know, at their PC. It's unable to get away from my PC. That's a very common sentence we hear. Leisure and studies, it's all on the PC. They have a lot of problems with the time management. This is particularly then for our faculty, between the courses of theory and practice. Investing, we have the impression they invest a lot of time in assignments for studios and Labo, and also online group assignments are not always easy. They often complain about it, that it's really hard to have a group assignment online. I think, and part of the reason is because they're missing out on the social life on campus and also, you know, after classes, because they often discuss with peers their projects. They can talk about it in a meeting, they can show it to each other, and this is something they're missing. And that's why they're very uncertain and they spend a lot of time, you know, working on these assignments. Sometimes difficulties in communication with teachers, also because it's online. It's harder to have a discussion with a teacher or to ask something. As you say, they're all black screens, numbers on black screens. They complain a lot about stress, unable to relax. They have sleeping problems, panic attacks. Also, financial problems are often an issue, and we also know that Corona is affecting the weaker students, and it's also in fact affecting international students. What do we do at the faculty? What are the initiatives we have developed and are still developing? For sure, we had to switch to very intense guidance of the students. We try to be proactive. We're calling the students if we get signals from fellow students or teachers telling us that students don't appear in the classes, have been missing for a couple of weeks, or students having problems. We are also first line contact for our students. We have a lot of online talks with the students, so they really contact us, and it's even more than before. That's something that's, I think, easier to contact your study career counselor by phone. We also developed an online Corona survival guide with tips and tricks how to survive your day. We have group student talks with the Vice Dean. The program directors and study career counselors, this usually in the evening. It was very active during the beginning of the pandemic and also in the first semester. It was on a regular basis. Now it's slowed down a bit. There are online group chats and info sessions on time management, deep level learning, exams, etc. We do have a very close collaboration, and this really was with the pandemic, with STAR, the Student Council. They often contact us if there are problems or if they want to discuss something. And then, of course, there's also the website of Home at KU Leuven, which also offers workshops on mental well-being. The mental well-being is, yeah, this is, I think, the buzzword that was that is used during the pandemic or the Corona pandemic for students. And then we also have Stuvo, the student, Stuvo, they organize a lot. They have psychologists, so they have online talks with psychologists 3 times a week. Students can call in confidential chats in the afternoon. They also offer housing, financial help, and sometimes student jobs. That was also something that was not possible during a time, student jobs. They organize a lot of Corona-proof social activities, online quizzes, but also Corona-proof walks in the cities. There will be a walk in Brussels with picnic for international students on the 8th of May. And then they organized also the PS We Love You, which was an initiative to write a letter to students to really tell them that they shouldn't give up. And this was my letter to the students. So with the chair, and I'm going to finish with it. So I wanted to express my admiration for them in my letter. And so being a student now is really not easy. And I based myself on an assignment they have in the first year. They have to design a chair, and the chair is a metaphor of a student during Corona, or this chair. The chair is sturdy. It's not too perfect because the situation is not perfect, but it's strong enough to withstand anything, the Corona. It has armrests and well-fitting backrests because the students, they really support each other and they really embrace each other. We are witness of it every day. And even the embracement is virtual, it is there. And the colors are proof of their creativity. I was really touched by the works Karel Bourgeois sent in his mail, because then you see that they really want to become an architect or an interior architect. And most of the students are really doing their best to survive these difficult periods. So this is the chair with all the characteristics of the students during Corona. That was my contribution.
Thank you so much, Isabel, for such a thorough overview. I will give the floor to Thomas.
Thank you. Scene 0, the opening. In German, the word scene or Szene means or translates literally into scene as, and has the identical meaning in the context of a movie or a play. But it also has the second use in referring to a group of people that form a community around a common interest. Scene 2, facture is the act, it's the process or the manner of making. Scene 3, it is used to indicate someone's, the artist, the craftsman, the architect, his hand or her hand in handling a medium and a material. Scene 4, it is the recognizable way of drawing a line, making a collage, constructing a coherent and relevant discourse, designing a detail, making a model. Scene 5, facture is where a stimulating rivalry lures, but lovingly. Scene, by bringing together a body of works, the facture exhibition aims at inducing that rivalry, but lovingly. It is the possibility of an encounter. Scene 8. No, it is a multitude of encounters. Scene 9. Better maybe des rencontres. Scene 10. We are in a Wunderkammer. Scene 11. And yes, it misses the physical proximity and bodily impact of the selected works and drawings. Scene I lost counting. But then again, you are that Wunderkammer. Scene this collection of you. Scene a faculty is a learning environment. It is more than a number of courses, and it only works when it is reciprocal as a learning environment, where part to whole, where part to part within that whole are mutually invigorating. A faculty is a scene. It is a group of people that form a community around a common interest. Because form is content too. My name is Thomas Ooms. I'm curator of the Craftsmanship engagement, lecturer at the faculty, and architect at Studio Tuin en Wereld. Closing scene. And I hope you will make a scene.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. So we will open the floor to discussions. If there's any questions, you can always also use the chat tool to write down your questions.
Can I pose the first question?
Yes.
Isabel, you were talking about this Corona help at the faculty and the Corona help at Stuvo. I was just wondering, is this something new? Is it increased, the support you give to students, or is the demand increased? Or was it always like that? So is it something specific under Corona that there's a sort of enormous program for support, Corona support at the faculty and at Stuvo?
Yeah, I think, well, I'm only 2 years out of faculty, so, I think it has intensified a lot. We always had the student guidance, but it was more students who had problems. There was not really a proactive approach. That has changed a lot, and we also have intensified all the information sessions, all the chat sessions. This is what I also hear from my colleagues in Ghent. We do have a lot more conversations with the students, yeah, calling us for help. There's health issues. There's also issues with the families. There's a huge increase in all these problems. Also with the international students, we do have the impression that there's a lot more pressure on them because they're alone. Yeah, they also ask us, because a lot of it is online, a lot of the courses are online. Yeah, I think it has intensified a lot. Of course, some of the things were in place. Also, Stuvo is really saying that they have not enough personnel to follow up all the online chats, all the conversations with the psychologists. So yeah, it really has changed.
I'm asking this because normally as a teacher in class or in studio, you somehow get these questions or problems from students, whilst today behind the screen, there's no way, or it becomes so difficult to get in touch with students, especially around this kind of things, not let's say not about the education, but the personal affairs.
Yeah, we don't reach all students, that's a fact, but I think the students contact us more than before because they were in class with the teachers, and if there were problems, I think they discussed it first with the teachers. Sometimes you can feel that students have a close relationship with their teachers. But I think now, yeah, especially with online sessions, I think they contact us more than they do because they're afraid, because it's online. You know, they don't want to talk about it, and so these are the things we often hear from students.
Thank you.
We have a few questions from the chat, but if you prefer to ask them, you could open the camera and the microphone. Yes. So we have a question from Patrick.
Yeah, it's just a practical question, Thomas. The scenes you were showing were part, I thought, of the exhibition in preparation. So maybe just some practicalities how this exhibition can be visited, because I think the images were very intriguing. People want to see more.
Yeah, thanks for that opportunity, Patrick. There is a Tumblr account, but we will launch the next Craftsmanship exhibition next week, Wednesday. So the posters and flyers and all the communication following that will following the next days, beginning of next week.
Okay, so this was a preview.
This is a preview.
A privilege.
Scoop especially for you guys.
Thank you. Okay. Timon, you wanted to add a question?
Yeah, hi. I had the question if you think there will be a remarkable difference between pre-pandemic architecture or architects and post-pandemic architecture.
if you ask me, I think the impact of this is way too early to really understand fully. But I think in the way we operate, and therefore also the way we produce architecture, will be affected. And I think it will be kind of a shut line. Yes, I think so. This is not a minor thing that is happening now. It's really I think it's part of bigger crisis, and that will definitely affect how we work as architecture, and how the architecture we produce will, but in which way, I don't know. No clue.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to add to that. I think, Timon, yes, per definition, the question will be to discover whether that was or is related to what happened now or not. I think that will be a lot of debates then following in researches and exploration, whether that was cause or symptom and cause, etc.
Yeah, I agree with Thomas. Yes, of course, it's an interesting question. It will be a rupture for sure, but the point is in what way, and that's why a debate like this is interesting, to see how other people relate to that rupture that COVID somehow suddenly caused, and we have to think of that rupture and give it a place. And so the point, I would say, yes, of course, there will be a post period and a pre-period, but the point is, in what way will it change? And that's up to you, me, and others.
All right, thank you.
We have also a question by Thierry. If you would like to ask it on your own for Isabel. If not, I can read it, however you prefer.
Well, you can go ahead.
Okay.
It's okay if you do it.
Okay. So the letter is intimate and close on the one hand, and distant in time and space on the other. Did you actually write a letter to the students? If so, what kind of letter was it, and how did you send it? Did it lead to a correspondence, or an exchange back and forth?
Yeah, it was a letter. Well, it was actually part of this STUVO action. So they are now distributing the letters. So I don't know if I didn't have any reaction until now. The letter was it was a general letter. It was mentioned, it was actually for all the students. Yeah, maybe expressing my admiration for them, to how they cope with the whole situation now as a faculty. If you want, I can send it to you, and then you can read it. It was really Corona specific, and also how they still managed to continue their studies, to still act as a student council, to organize activities, to help each other, because we're also witness of that. Students say, I will help the student because I had a similar situation. So yeah, it was distant and personal at once. But if you'd like, I can send you the letter.
Well, that was not my the purpose of my question, if I may. The point is that what kind of what I think is for me interesting is the fact that the letter, like the high time of the letter, the written letter on paper that was sent with the post, was also in a kind of time when people were physically disconnected from one another and didn't have these kind of direct physical contact situation, and that you kind of it was a kind how to say it. It was a type of communication that was not speedy necessarily, but nonetheless a kind of a deliberate act and a thoughtful act in which you are also expecting the response, and that it's a dialogue. So in that sense, it's more explicitly, in my opinion, a dialogue, and I think it's an interesting format in the sense that it also has this kind of characteristic of people being like physically disconnected and having this intermediate material things going in two directions.
But
So
I think that's I think the purpose also of this initiative of Stuvo to to ask people to write a physical letter, and then they somewhere hide it in at places that are, well, not hide it, but put it at places that are obvious, and they hope that they will get response from the students so that they will write back. That's the concept of this action they are taking. Just because everything is online now, when we talk on online Zoom sessions and PowerPoint sessions, but to have like a letter or a card and then write to each other. So I thought it was a good idea, so that's why I got involved. Yeah,
I agree with you, because before, when I was young, there was this thing about pennevrienden. I don't know how to say it. Where this kind of social connection was established in that way.
And you learn a lot from each other, writing letters and expressing your ideas.
Thank you.
Yeah, still have.
Thank you. We will pass to the second round. And I would like to remind you all on the tight schedule of 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and to please use the Q&A tool to ask the questions. So we start with Burak Pak and Caroline Newton, Erit, and then Livia. I give the floor to the first presenter.
Oh, sorry, do you see my full screen, all the cover, or?
No.
Wait.
Not yet.
So, can you see my full screen now?
We see your presenter now.
Yes, yeah.
All right, sorry for this.
No worries.
Now the screen is already gone.
Can you see it now?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, today with Caroline, we are going to introduce our call for altering practices for intersectionality. Since we have been asked to introduce ourselves, with Caroline, we are the co-founders of the Altering Practices for Urban Inclusion group. Caroline, would you like to introduce yourself?
Very briefly, I'm Caroline. I'm teaching some courses in the International Masters, both theory and design studio, and in the urban planning Masters. And next to that, I'm associate professor at TU Delft and the Van Eester Fellow. And yeah, I'm very much interested in some of the issues that Burak is going to share.
Yes, and I've been working in St. Lucas since 2009, and I worked in several research projects, starting with alternative projects prepared for Brussels with Innovius project, incubators of public spaces, and lately I'm working on co-creating Solidary Mobile Housing project with Aurélie de Smet. And this presentation is just a draft and intended as an extended abstract. So it's the first step of a critical reflection to be extended further, but also a call. So this is actually, we are a young and diverse group, about 20 members. Some of the photos are not in this, unfortunately, slide. And we are involved in several PhDs and research projects we want to learn from during this pandemic. And to clarify, what we mean by altering is that we actually mean practices those which seek to question and transform the sociopolitical conditions of the spaces into which they intervene, as well as to test the boundaries and procedures of their disciplines. And by practices, we mean the extension of the concept of practice towards critical spatial research beyond the limitations of isolated top-down and neoliberal practices, reframing spatial practice as diverse forms of civic-situated knowledge creation in and through design. Through this presentation, we would like to zoom out a little bit and contextualize the work produced through our research group, but also somehow talk about the societal effects of COVID and our potential agency in addressing these. So here is our brief motivations. We have witnessed a worldwide increase in inequality in the last 4 decades, and urban spaces in our cities have been driven by market-oriented policies and opened up to the consumption of the elite. So the contradictions and unsustainability of uneven urban development became prevalent. Decades of neoliberal policies resulted in the commodification and marketization of our lives. Deregulation, privatization, and reduction in government spending started to undermine our democracy, our cities, our society, maybe including our academy. The housing crisis of 2008 accelerated the increase in urban inequality and asymmetries. Most importantly, the recent COVID-19 pandemic brought additional challenges to the vulnerable citizens, pushing individuals and families into poverty. COVID pandemic added new challenges, vulnerabilities, burdens, and in doing so, reinforced the old ones. Vulnerable communities and people in our cities are negatively affected by the ongoing exclusive capital-focused policies, creating health crisis on one side, structural discrimination based on gender, ethnicity, political stance, income levels, and many others on the other. Together with the emerging spread and normalization of racism, these concerns are amplified and made visible by the COVID-19 pandemic. It is necessary to give voice to the people's experiences in the excluded margins of society to better inform both academic and popular debates, currently dominated by powerful and privileged elites, often in masculine and white spaces. So we would like to call for intersectional thinking and action to allow for better understanding of complex power structures and lived experiences of those who are coping with and having to adapt to both the pandemic and the emerging conditions. Intersectionality can be traced back to Kimberly Crenshaw and addresses how systems of oppression deeply intertwine and influence experiences and opportunities. Intersectional thinking means recognizing and acting upon interconnected nature of social categorizations, creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination and disadvantage. In this context, this presentation is a call in 2 tracks. We would like to rethink the academia and our agency as researcher, teacher, practitioners, considering the interconnected nature of socio-spatial exclusion via categorizations, labels, stigma, concerning the overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination and disadvantage. And through design-driven research, we would like to address the alternative ways to address the systems of oppression that deeply intertwine, influence experiences and opportunities. Building on Paolo Baccetta's intersectional interpretation, we propose 2 directions. One is co-formations. These are co-creative assemblages for action through dynamic, contextual, and localized power relations where we can challenge those. And the second proposition is to make co-productions, to think through broad, thick, intense power relations spanning over wide spatial temporalities such as neoliberal urbanism, racism, colonialism, neocolonialism, occupation, and others. In order to make intersectional impact, we need intersectional alliances. For instance, intersectional learning serving to society, challenging power relations, but not enforcing new ones and serving to neoliberal interests. We need complex hybrid strategies to empower and integrate the virtual and physical. We need to experiment with intersectional performativities to facilitate everyday practices, address individual needs, and allow intersectional choice. And we need to rethink architecture as intersectional commons. So this was our group's first attempt to call for intersectional thinking and action. And after this feedback session, we want to make a more in-depth and critical review of particular works we produced through COVID-19.
Thank you for your presentation. I give the floor directly to Reed.
Hi, good evening. So it was asked us to share some experiences about the lockdown. And I wrote a little text where I described how I felt in first lockdown, that it was actually a bit of a tunnel vision, that you were just, we're just following something, but you didn't know where it was going to end, or it was just, searching in a dark tunnel. And it was difficult to make group works. Like you come to the best ideas when you are in front with people and you exchange crazy ideas, or you just say just random stuff. And it happens when you see the people in front of you and you can really see each other expressions, or really feel what they are going to react. And now online, it's a bit different and difficult to have these nice conversations, because you actually have to queue to say what you want to say, because you have this different screens and they are not lighting up when you have the ID. And this continuous thing of queuing and waiting until you want to say something doesn't really function to share nice ideas. And that was really the main issue I had in the first lockdowns. In the second was already more nice, because we could go to school sometimes for studios. So then I made a little sketch to maybe that's what I always do when I want to express something. I don't know if you see it.
Yes.
What I wanted to explain in the sketch was that in the first lockdown, actually the importance of the public space, because every individual really lives in their room, in their space, the own created space, the private space. And I was really interested in how important public space became, because that was really the place where you go outside and you can see the other people actually searching for the same thing that you are searching, like the livability, the human aspect again. And it was actually really, I thought it was really interesting to draw this. But still, what I wanted to say on the first drawing is that there was still this space around the people. You're not getting too close, or connecting was very difficult. And I think to be clear, what I want to say is that we have to, as architects, really interact in this point, like not forcing, but opening ways to, again, see people and the humanity. And this is what I want to say with the classroom, who becomes the public space. That it's not too open in the first instance, because it will be maybe too much, but like a closed environment where people again are quietly interacting with each other again, but not really like a big open market, or just a closed environment, a safe environment, a bit the private space you created in the lockdown, but then in the classroom, and the different stories coming back to each other again. So, I think that's what I wanted to share.
Rit, I learned at least two things from what you presented. Actually, first, the importance of public space as a place for intersectional action and everyday life that we really use. And losing that, we need to create new forms of intersectional communication, also ways. And I think what you drew is also a kind of imagining how the classroom could be through these new forms of intersectionalities you imagine. So I think very, very interesting to see. Caroline, would you like to add something?
No, I agree. but I think it's time for the next presentation. We can discuss it maybe more.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing the sketch.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you for sharing your experiences. Livia, the floor is yours.
Hello. Livia de Bethune. So I'm lecturing and teaching in the architecture studio and urbanism studio, and I will present some work we did with the students. So I will share my screen. So I don't know if you see it large, full screen. Is it fine in this way? Yes?
It's cut in 2 pages.
Okay, I will see. I don't know why. Wait just a moment. Yes. So as a starting exercise for the studio work, the students were asked to rethink their personal living environment, starting from their lockdown experience. So it's an exercise that I did twice with the students. First this year in the first master in architecture, we did it with the international master student architecture. And in the second semester, I did it with the urban design students. So they were with a bit of a different approach, but both they rethought their home, their room, but also their adjacent private or public outdoor space. And it was really based on their experience, on a kind of a phenomenological approach. And they developed kind of different types of actions or proposed as opening, expanding, raising, appropriating, greening this kind of surrounding. And this was the base of their next larger student project they developed later on. So in the first semester, it was an international master, and it was quite interesting. This is the map they made themselves. So they made the layout and the master of this work themselves. And it was quite interesting to see that they had this kind of comparable experience all over Europe, or even all over the world. And it brought them in a way together because they had this kind of, they were all spread over the world, we could say, but they had a kind of comparable experience. And they shared this in the studio and started to rethink their very proper space. And it was sometimes from very small interventions, just as opening up a window in their room to have a contact with the large surrounding, like Leah was proposing here, on this nice open view she got through opening up a window, or a Wout who proposed to, who living in an allotment in Flanders, and in a very, to create activity, to create vibrance, to the much too quiet area, and he wanted to transform it to create life. Or of course, lots of them were living very small, in very small rooms or spaces, and who proposed in different ways how to enlarge their home, their room here, by just putting a structure over the common house of the students, or students who were just feeling in again in another subdivision allotment much too enclosed, and wanted to have more interaction with the outdoor in one sense, and on the other side more intimacy into the family house, so to have more closeness. So it was kind of this double contradiction. Other proposals from the urban students was also some of them, these are just a few of them that I bring up here. A student who's living in an apartment on the 11th floor, who had in Leuven and having a view over the city and the roofs of the city, and who had a dialogue with a sparrowhawk, which was apparently living there on one of these roofs. and he was feeling very lonely as this comparable to the bird he saw, but he also saw all this kind of flat unused roofs and proposed to rethink, no, it doesn't work, the roofs and to green up completely roofs as a kind of hectares of green, which were, and gardens offering to the city, some of them accessible, some of them not, around the station of Leuven. Or the experience of Eneida, who lives in Ghent and along the coupure, where they transformed the coupure by taking away some of the cars in the coupure on the right way and just giving more space to bikers and pedestrians. But she said, now this is a very interesting first step where we can go further and also give space to nature and to green up the whole lane along the coupure. In this, she shows an image of that. Or the image of Eline, who proposed to also to rethink the coupure and starting from the experience of the use of the borders of the canal. But whenever there is a sunny day, you can see here on the picture, the people who use these borders. And she said, yeah, just let a city like Ghent missing a lot of green space, missing open space, how to transform these borders into kind of living fringe of a river, but also creating a new open space on the river where the water becomes the public space, and creating this kind of new way of using the space in the city. So these are kind of little proposals how to transform unused space, how to rethink the space, how to it was quite interesting to see how all the students came up with proposals which were very simple, sometimes quite simple, sometimes a bit more complicated, but with their own reflection, their own proper experience, strong and conscious experience. And it gives a kind of depth to the proposals they developed later on in the studio. So I think it's quite interesting and it was an interesting exercise, which is still going on in this second semester.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I would suggest to keep in line with our closing time at 8 to continue with the next round of presentations, so we can do the discussion a bit more lengthier at the end. So the third round is Bjorn, Lea, and Dag.
So you can hear me now?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. Hello, everybody. Sorry. My name is Bjorn Houtekier. I'm, wait, I will pick up an image. I'm a studio design teacher at first and second year. I imagine you can see the image of the WTC floor? Yes? Yes. Okay, great. So I want to discuss a polemic text I've written about the difference between COVID teaching and WTC teaching. You see this image, and for me, this is like the last manifestation of a real architecture school, teaching real architecture in a live setting. And I thought maybe COVID teaching could be the first manifestation of a digital school or a virtual school teaching digital architecture. Not so much and not seeing students, because I think that's very important, but rather in the way we teach, what we teach, because I think it could be that if I look at all things digital happening now in architectural world, that maybe St. Lucas, and it's an open question, is becoming obsolete. So I've written a polemic text and I will read it for you. In fact, I will not read it myself, but I will let a nice lady read it for me, because her accent is so much better and my English is a bit rubbish. So here we go. I hope it's about 3 minutes of text. I hope you can follow it and maybe we can have a discussion about it later. So here we go.
I don't hear anything.
You hear it?
I do not hear anything.
Sorry. Okay, that's a problem, I guess. And is there somewhere a thing that I should choose?
Bjorn, if you press the button of share screen, there are
Yes.
two boxes in blue where you can check the include audio.
Ah, wait.
I think that's a problem.
Yeah, sorry. So, and I do share screen, and then what?
Well, first I think you have to leave this this share screen and do it again. But if you have, so now you press share screen.
Yes.
And then you can see a box in below share sound. If you can, when you can choose your different screens.
I'm sorry. So here we go again. I think screen. This is it. My apologies. So I will restart.
An awkward manifesto.
Is it better?
If teaching at WTC was the last and grandiose manifestation of a real architecture school, teaching real architecture in a ballroom setting, then COVID teaching must be the first manifestation of a virtual architecture school, teaching digital architecture in a screen size setting. At last. Some consider it tragic that architecture schools are theoretical bastions, more or less out of touch with everyday reality and focused on architecture as art. Rather, it is tragic that architecture schools are rapidly losing grip on all things virtual, computer-guided, data-driven or user-defined. Just recently it has become possible to walk into a project development agency, select a house or apartment on a screen, push walls and ceilings around and choose your preferred materials. A price tag on the side immediately shows the cost of this selection. No architect is needed. It is obvious that this revolution will only accelerate. In a few years' time, a couple seeking a dream house for two and a baby will put on a virtual reality helmet and, during a cozy evening with cheese and wine, click together a two-story cottage with an exact budget. After 1 month of 3D printing and laser-guided assembly, the digitally conjured-up house stands ready for furniture, the obligatory accent-painted wall and its inhabitants. No architect will be needed. If we disregard the fact that students have been confined to depressingly small rooms for weeks on end, the last 12 months have been acutely forward-looking. It was often overwhelming to experience how much could be done at a distance, digitally interacting with other teachers and students behind a computer screen. Just recently, the Flanders Architecture Institute started compiling a digital archive of SketchUp models, the horror. True, the beauty of hour-long student-crafted cardboard models is our unquestionable DNA. And true, the beauty of painstakingly hand-drawn perspectives is our unquestionable DNA. Still, why not raise the question? Should we protect and keep administering our slowly degrading analog DNA, or should we try and revamp our persona into an able and truly contemporary body? Digitalism is here to stay, with its quirks and merits, and students already breathe all things virtual. What is more, so do engineers, communal services, contractors, developers, and clients, yes, those undeniable future architects. So, why don't we? Can a school, proud of its stubborn and solipsistic history, actually become history? Just by holding on to the familiar do's and ignoring the inconvenient don'ts? The fact that architecture is an ancient craft doesn't make it future-proof. Maybe it is time to shake off those false fears and gently embrace the menace.
Okay, so this was part of my text, like a synthesis. I just want to show one image and then a little movie. This is an image of a 3D printed house in China. Of course, it looks clumsy and ridiculous. It's like a shed intertwined with a bunker, and we can laugh about it. But on the other hand, I saw a lot of very impressive movies of like the ETH Zurich, where they built houses totally digitally made up and digitally assembled. So the question, in fact, for me is, when looking at COVID teaching and real teaching, are we missing some boat at St. Lucas? Are we still promoting an old type of teaching and not looking at digital methods of teaching and building? So that's, in fact, the main question. I don't have the answer. Maybe I like the way we teach now, but maybe we're on the wrong train. So that's an open question to everybody. And I want to show this little film. It will be double speed, so it will be quite quick. And that will be it then. Here we go.
the DFAB house is actually the first time very different new building technologies come together in an inhabitable building. It's a very exciting milestone for architecture, for science, and the future digital building culture.
Next is the place where innovation starts, where we push new topics forward, like in this case, digital fabrication, thanks to a collaboration between academia and industry.
I think it's key that we were able to bring together so many different people from different backgrounds, both in research and in industry, to build this project. Regardless whether you're a researcher or a professional or a builder or an architect, we all leave this project with a change perspective.
The technologies shown here in the DFAB house, they have multiple implications and advantages. The ecology is much better if we build with these new technologies. The economy changes. And lastly, what we can experience here, the architecture changes. There is a strong societal impact by these new technologies, and by literally taking the research out of the lab into reality, into a built, inhabitable house, we actually provide something very important to society to experience these changes and discuss it.
Okay, that's it. Thanks for your attention. Bye.
Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, the screen is yours.
Yes. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So my name is Leah, and I am a student of the International Master in the second year, and I wanted to take the opportunity of this debate to share my draft reflections on the spatial consequences that online teaching had on my living space. So I spent the first lockdown in Brussels in a shared apartment, and we were 3 people there, me and 2 young architects. And basically, since we were all meant to work from home and we had very small bedrooms and a big living room, we turned the living room into a sort of office space. And I was super enthusiastic about this because since I was living with 2 professionals, this new office in the living room had to be somehow a bit professional as well, and likely to be better conditions than the workspaces we have at school. So the guys brought their double screens from their office, they bought a printer, we set up a big collective and permanent table in the middle of the room, and all of a sudden I had a professional settings to work on my student projects. Space-wise, the setup of this new office in the living room was quite nice, despite the fact that we had no proper living room anymore. But function-wise, we faced a difficulty that we had not really foreseen, which was the limited number of electrical plugs that we had in the room and the distance between the electrical plugs and our new setup. Because we might tend to think that the virtual workplace or the virtual classroom can free us from physical constraints of having to be physically present in a specific physical place, but the devices that allow us to join the virtual classroom are physical as well. They must be connected to the internet and also physically connected to a power source. And as basic as an electrical plug can be, that means simply a hole in a wall, I realized during the pandemic, meaning when a consequent number of devices invaded our house in order to keep us connected to the outer world and to work, that this almost insignificant architectural detail, that is the electrical plug, was the key element that dictated our new collective working setup. Basically, we calculated where to sit according to the electrical plugs and the length of cables. And these 2 criteria completely overruled the rest of the apartment. We wouldn't sit somewhere because the light was nice or because there was a nice view to the outside. We would just sit where we could be plugged. Adaptators and multi-socket strips became our best friends. We would unplug the music to plug the printer when we needed to print, or unplug the double screen to add an extra lamp when the room would get dark at night. We could not unplug phones because they were providing internet connection. A sort of hierarchy of objects was implicitly declared. For example, my digital piano keyboard was not considered as a working device, so it didn't have the priority to be plugged during my flatmate's working hours. We became used to ask each other at least 1,000 times per day, do you mind if I unplug this, or please could you plug that for me? We tried to sort cables so that they wouldn't mess up all the time with each other, but we never succeeded. It was always a mess and a sort of ever-growing jungle, climbing chairs, tables, and defying laws of gravity. And I wanted to reflect on this for several reasons, especially since we will go for more and more digital way of doing, may it be for education or for so many other things. So first, I realized that almost everything we use needs electrical current, and it raises questions regarding energy consumption in terms of quantity, but also in terms of equality of access to this energy. There's a sort of paradox that the more you make energy available, the more you will consume it. But then if the access to energy is limited, there will be competition for it. It happens in the world between countries, but it also happens within the household, at school, or in the train. You always want to sit next to an electrical plug, and you're pissed if someone is already sitting there before you. Secondly, it struck me to realize to what extent spatial quality can be undermined by the location of electrical plugs in the apartment. It annoyed me to realize that the effort we made to create a working space for 3 people in the living room was more based on a comprehensive understanding of where the electrical plugs were in the room than taking into account basic yet fundamental architectural elements such as natural light or a window with a beautiful view. Bringing the office inside home was not a gentle negotiation between our existing furniture and our new setup, but rather prioritizing the working setup depending on electrical plugs, and then trying to accommodate what was meant for the rest of life solely in the leftover space. Thirdly, because as an architecture student, I never decided in my school projects where the electrical plugs should be. It's part of all the technical stuff we don't really consider because it's not the core of our profession. But after months of home office, I don't believe in the sacred flexibility of the free plan anymore if it's not thought along electrical plugs already at the stage of the design process. And to finish, I want to open up by saying that in French, the word for furniture is mobilier, which means that can be moved. And the opposite is immobilier, and we use this term to refer to buildings or solid things that don't move. And for me, with appliances, we are in a sort of in-between. They can move around like furniture, but in a perimeter defined by the length of the cable and the location of the electrical plug. And this in-between situation is to me a sort of metaphor of the blurred flexibility we're navigating into, with its pros and cons, undeniable advantages and undeniable limitations. So these are the thoughts I want to reflect upon for the publication. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ria. Van, the floor is yours.
Hello, I am Dag Boutsen, the dean of this faculty until this summer, and then Yves Schonians will take over. We had a faculty council this afternoon, and the new dean presented his team. Patrick, I think you can share your screen with my images, makes it a little bit easier for me. Thanks a lot, Patrick, and I'll say next when you jump to the next slide. Okay, next. It's a kind of, it's not a statement, but it's what I think now. What the result is in between working in the real world and working in the, let's call it the Miro board world. You see on the background a still image of Grande Hotel, which is in Beira, in Mozambique. That's a hotel from 1955. It's totally destroyed, kind of empty since the 70s. Mozambique is a terrible past, and there are now like hundreds of people living in that Grande Hotel. If you want to watch more about it, Lotte Stoops, who is a Brussels politician, made an incredible nice 1 hour and 10 minutes movie on this Grande Hotel, and it's on YouTube. Now, opposite to it, I put this picture of Ursula von der Leyen, who you all know, and who launched this new project called A New European Bauhaus, which wants to facilitate and inject a lot of energy, money, and people and stakeholders and architects and engineers into turning the world into a more sustainable thing. The creative industries and architectural schools are all talking about it. And at the same time, the contrast with Beira, with the real world, is kind of shocking. Next slide. Again, an image of the same hotel inside without people, but you can see how it is alive on the YouTube movie. Now I'm involved in the EAAE, which is the European Association of Architectural Education, with a lot of interesting academies. There is one called the Education Academy. And with a lot of schools out of Europe, we are working on different things. And we are also writing a charter on architectural education with some principles and practices of architectural education in a kind of position paper. Next slide. Now, that's a long text. You can find it on the website of the EAAE, but I want to focus on one chapter, and that is relating architectural education and the research practice as a kind of resonating fields. Now, it states in 6 sentences that architectural education requires a research climate, that academic design education is inquiry-based. Inquiry is a nicer word than research sometimes, in which both student and the teachers are engaged in a common quest. Next slide. In such conditions, architectural education, and particularly the architectural design studio, becomes a place of research in itself. We are trying to write this position paper for universities, for stakeholders, for European governments, etc. And we want to stress on this particular form of architectural design studio, which is this place of research in itself. Educational outcomes of inquisitive design studio work, and inquisitive is again a nicer word, are validated as part of the large field of research output and properly evaluated on its own terms. Architectural education delivers inquisitive practitioners, and design education and didactics are a research field. Now, that are all big kind of words. Sometimes we doubt about it. Sometimes we feel uncomfortable. A lot of architectural schools, design schools like ours, St. Lucas, are grown into big universities. We are grown in a research-based university. And we have to stress on the fact that actually there is lots of kinds of research, but the design studio itself is a particular world in that sense. Next slide. Again, this little image of in the frame, New European Bauhaus, and 3 words: beautiful, sustainable, together. And I put it deliberately on, again, a still of this brilliant movie, because sometimes the perception of what we're talking about is not the same everywhere in the world. And I was witnessing, for instance, in a Dean Summit in Oslo, was online, last week, Polish professors talking about how they work with Ukrainian and White Russia and Russian students that think of this sustainable future as a luxurious element. They have other problems to face, kind of. But anyway, we find ourselves in this network. There's a lot of international students around in our campuses in Ghent and in Brussels. We are getting more and more international. We are attracting professors from all over the world. I myself am having a studio, a master dissertation studio with students from Iran, China, Ecuador, Bangladesh, Japan, etc., Canada. And actually, the word multiversities is a nice one. Also talked about in this Dean Summit, and it was by Susanna Sancansani from Milano. And she says, yes, because of the pandemic and because of the globalization, these multiversities, not universities, multiversities, or maybe transforming in netversities, which is a nice way to put it. Next slide. Now, in the studio I'm running, and in all studios that I see, and in the stories that you were telling, you have this new way of talking with each other on Miro boards and on whatever boards. And in a certain way, my point is that here you see some bubbles taken out of inspiration is Spatial Agency, a really incredible website and book written by Jeremy Till and Tatjana Schneider on other ways of doing architecture. It's actually on designing situations rather than designing buildings. And you see here an image of how 11 students, together with me, are developing all these teams in bubbles, in kind of networks, and actually are registering all the things, thanks to Miro, in a different way from before the pandemic, in a different way from how we used to work, just discussing things. Next slide. You see that actually 11 students could shape a kind of enormous cloud full of little bullets with context, crisis, concept, references, ways of making events, all coded colors, to create this environment where things become clear. Next slide. Here you see how on an Education Academy of the EAAE last Friday afternoon, we had a workshop with 40 international people. And the Miro board you see there on top of this slide is a kind of reflection on some presentations, on some major questions in trying to improve the position paper I was talking about. And this Miro board has been produced in 20 minutes by 40 people working together in an easy way that has never been possible before. This is the kind of things we are making more easy. And my point is to conclude that this inquiry-based design studios, that the research is actually being facilitated because we all need to communicate to each other in a more organized way. And the organized way, the visual way that we use now, offers more deep understanding, more inquiry, deeper reflections, and more rigor, actually, in a kind of research-based studio. That is what I think that is a gigantic advantage of what the pandemic has caused us and how we need to work now. That was my point. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I invite all 6 presenters to open their cameras and their mics. I will start by reading the questions that were written just to cut the time. So starting with Reed, in the second lockdown, studio meetings were again possible, but theory was kept online. Sadly, following the old practice theory hierarchy, I was wondering how would you redraw the theory classroom today?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, but I had some questions. Do you mean how it is now, or how I would see it when it is normal again, or?
To whom is the question?
I was posing this question to Riet. So she redrew the studio classroom based on the experience of, in the second lockdown, having the possibility of going back to school. So I thought, yes, we don't have this, we didn't have the possibility of meeting again in theory classes. But I was just wondering how would you now redraw the theory classroom?
Well, I think the first case I have my doubts about theory classes in aulas and more than 100 people, students, because I think there's still a border when you're with so much people in a room that you don't have these conversations, or it's still a bit terrifying to pose a question with 90 other people you don't know. So I would say theory classes has to be a bit more like practice, make the classes more small, and because then you have the communication, and then you change thoughts, and then there is a topic that you discuss, and then you learn. But not when there is someone before. Maybe I'm thinking too much in a radical way, but not when there's someone standing before you and just saying how it is. That's how I see it.
Yes, thank you. Eneida.
Thank you, Reed. So following the same topic from Leah, would you describe what you describe as the classroom being the public space? It is sort of a logical continuation of the pre-COVID classroom already being a space where you would rather chat than actually work on your assignments.
Yeah, I agree with what you wrote down, but I think I mean more like that different people from different classes are sitting in a room and maybe present what they do. Like, are they making models? People can watch how they do it. They learn from little things. Maybe have exposition, the works you did, make a bit of a library, or expose the things that were produced before, and make a big classroom from things that already has been designed, and to open up knowledge and share it with students.
Thank you. We have a question from an anonymous attendee from the Q&A towards Leah. Made me think about the really abstract non-stop city by Archizom, or Banham's differentiation house and home. According to your experience, why do you think that a non-plan Libre would function better than a plan Libre?
I think it's a good question, and that's easy to answer. But I think when the plan libre, so if we define plan libre by a sort of plan that is not obstructed by bearing walls, if this is plan libre, then this was when it was invented, seen as a sort of freedom, because then you could organize the spaces in a much more free and fluid way than when it was segmented into portions, because the ceiling had to be bared. But today, I think we've reached an extreme that there is no limits of space, of segments anymore. And it's much harder to appropriate spaces that are maybe endless and without definition, like genering or part of a sort of bigness system. And I tend to think, especially in pandemic times, that we go closer to our sort of animal instincts, and that sometimes we have to feel that our back is protected as well. And it doesn't always work to put a piece of furniture in the middle of the room if there's not a wall behind, or things like that. And we've opened a lot of perspectives, and I feel like now to make them more not functional, but more stimulating and working, we can put a bit more of enclosure back, I think. I don't know if it was very clear, but it's an interesting question. It has somehow reached a sort of a critical end, I think, the never-ending free plan. And we can see it with how the techniques come to somehow intersect into this and come just breaking the logic of the free plan. And I find this is really, really interesting, actually.
Thank you for your answer. Again, from Gideon. I like the image of the invasion of your house by all sorts of working devices, doing away with the living room, discussing the unplugging. It is certainly a vision of the future when talking about design practice. 2 questions. How do you organize the living room today? And are you now well prepared for practice, or do you want to leave ASAP?
Yeah, but the living room setting changed many times, because now I'm the only one working there. The two other guys are back to work. So just to give me the impression that I changed the place, I changed a bit the setting. But for example, I bought wireless headphones, because I'm just sick of seeing those cables everywhere, and I'm not Apple users. I know that like PCs and Microsoft have much more cable than Mac, for example. But then I'm trying to understand where I can take away cables and where I have to keep them. But it's true that this takes so much. It's not so much space in the end. It's just a wire, but the mental space that it takes, it's just huge. And for the second question, well prepared for a practice, or do you want to leave ASAP? No, I think still staying on the boat. I don't know if this prepared me for it, but yeah, it raised questions for sure. No.
Thank you. Question to Livia. In the critique and ethique class, students were reflecting on the post-corona city. It was very interesting, but at the same time, often very difficult to take a critical distance. COVID-19 somehow drowned us in the immediate moment of the now. How did it work in the studio setting?
I'm not sure if I understood completely the question. If it means that we worked, we had this also, a part of the studio was on site in the studio, partly was from a distance, but we had time for talks and discussions also. So it was not only completely abstract from a distance that they worked. There were really these exchange moments. I don't know if that's a question, what was, but it's true that it was kind of re-questioning, in fact, the way we live and how we live it and how we rethink it immediately.
Yeah, Livia, can I just repose the question? Because
yeah.
the idea was in critique and ethics, or theory class, we discussed a lot on the post-corona city, but it was very interesting, so no point about that. But what we felt is a sort of difficulty in taking critical distance, in thinking how our situation today links maybe with theory from the handbooks, with what we have learned in the past. Maybe think about the future. It appeared to me somehow as if we were stuck in this corona situation. I mean, everyone discussing this. The need for extra square meters in your room, the need for extra cycle space in the street, etc., etc. So, sort of, yeah, that's what I mean with this drowning in the immediacy of now. I mean, as if we can only discuss Corona by talking about our current situation and not yet look forward and maybe also look backwards by using theory or handbooks, or look into what architects have done in the past.
Yeah, no, it's true that while you had this kind of phenomenological approach of architecture, which is kind of also a bit one of the ideas behind of thinking. Because I think a lot of students make this project, some student work sometimes a kind of about an image of a project. Here you were really into this kind of having to went through this conscious experience, which was was very strong for everybody. So kind of rethinking how we lived. I think this kind of approach, this was one of the theories that they read about the phenomenology as one of so this was maybe one of the things I thought was interesting to as an exercise, as a short exercise of 3 weeks.
Yes, thank you.
If there's any more questions, we have time for 1 or 2 last ones.
So no last.
I have another question, but I was just waiting maybe for some.
Yeah. Okay. Gideon, you want to ask your question as a last, and then since we are running late.
I had this question for Brooke and Caroline after hearing this presentation. Yeah. Caroline is gone by now, but I guess Brooke is still in the room. The image of Black Lives Matter protests got my attention, and then having this discussion on intersectionality. What struck me in this Black Lives Matter protest was everyone is fine with intersectionality in theory, but the moment people get on the streets under full lockdown, suddenly everyone got cynical, critical about it. So I was just wondering how does that reflect on the theoretical discussion of intersectionality? And second, this moment of Black Lives Matter protest was very strong. I mean, politically and for most of us who were engaged. I was just wondering, did we have some moments like that in architectural culture somehow?
Yeah, I think, first of all, we are a part of the Design Justice Network. So there's a whole range of initiatives being launched with this Black Lives Matter movements. But also I would like to bring out this fact that Floyd was actually infected by COVID when he died, when he was killed, actually. So, and he lost his job. And that's why he found himself in a way there. So that has something to do with COVID. But at the same time, I think in Belgium media, the representation is quite limited. But around the world, this issue is continuing. So in the US, like every other week, there's an incident going on. But at the same time, also in Belgium, once in a while, this issue pops up. I think all these discussions raises a question on how do we approach the other as architects, and we need to actually rethink our position and our power position as architects, as defining the lives that we hold the power in our hands to define the spaces that people will live for decades. And we need to be aware of this. We need to recognize actually inequalities, and we need to enable representation of people to voice their concerns. And we need to actually contribute to redistribution as well. So there's actually an ethical stance coming out of this, which you were already mentioning before, I think, in the former debates.
Okay, thank you. I think we had a very interesting evening. It was a nice mix of different propositions, some very dense, some very spontaneous. I would like to thank all the contributors.
I apologize. I just noticed that Anushka had her hand raised, and if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. Before I conclude, I know it's past dinner time. Good evening from London. I wanted to hook in actually from, or follow on from what Burak just spoke about. So in London, for example, we had been in lockdown for a very long time, constrained to the perimeter of our domestic environments and a few kilometers out. And of course, on one hand, as many have mentioned, it has brought out the humanity. We have been occupying the city and the suburbs and rural contexts as we may have always wished we would. Walls that divided became turned into seating opportunities. I found neighbors sitting on the pavements having dinners, and the city being deregulated also by regulators. So in the sense of the campaigns that have been ongoing to give the street to other users, out of a sudden these things were possible. So it has shown that these kind of deregulations or re-regulations, I should say, because it's not a deregulation, are absolutely possible. At the same time, it has brought out the severe inequality and also what actually is now missing from our urban contexts, that we have lost or outmaneuvered the space, physically, the space that we can actually be in together, whether it's a public space, whether it's a common space. And now that we've seen that it is possible to deregulate, that the question maybe occurs in my mind, how we can build up on this opportunity to, what would our role be, also as a university, as a school, as a community of architects, but also citizens and students alike. And I don't know whether the experience was similar in where you are, were fixed, but that is a question that I have coming out of the situation. And, you know, obviously attached to that also the fight for different types of housing standards, the fight for more than the usual offer.
Anushka, I would like to build upon what you said, is actually this diverse forms of disorder and appropriation. These are like really more and more evident. So there is first in Ghent, there is an explosion of skateboarding kids. These are like 12, 13-year-old, 14-year-old, for instance, in front of the theater, has been turned into a mini skateboarding place. And the theater itself is giving some skateboarding infrastructure for the kids to play, because the playgrounds are basically closed and occupied. So there are different age groups, intersectional disorders are happening. And for instance, there are places like Turkey where lockdown is used to ban alcohol, for instance. Right now in Turkey, there's a 17-day ban on alcohol enforced by Erdogan. And right now, the shop sellers are preparing a disorder, a kind of a resistance, and to open their shops against it. So we see actually more and more civic actions to create loose kind of spaces and question the regulations, actually. And I think this should also apply to us as well. So we should also question the protocols that we operate through.
Absolutely, yeah.
Anushka, I just wanted to ask you, yes, I like this idea of the deregulation of the streets. So, and I didn't think of this discussion in that term. Usually I would talk about the redistribution of the streets. So the deregulation is a wonderful thing. Of course, this happened in Brussels too, somehow organized by the local and regional government, somehow spontaneous actions by people. But my question is, would the same kind of dynamic also be possible in architectural education, in the way we organize the school? Like you have a sort of organized and spontaneous deregulation of the way we deal with studios, classes, credits, exams?
Well, we have student antennas now. Like they have quite a voice, actually, the design studio. So for instance, we are voting whether to make online jury or hybrid jury. I think like we are also handing our authority and the studios are becoming more participatory, I think.
So just to answer also, I mean, deregulation has maybe to be seen cautiously, because we also see in economic terms and societal terms what deregulation leads to. So hence the rephrasing, re-regulation. Partially deregulation, but also re-regulation, of course, in that sense. But yes, the university could definitely play a role in that, in my view, in the sense of opening up the debate to the outside, not just, so hence a debate that is not just amongst ourselves, but perhaps also with the citizens or with the politicians actually as well, who ultimately make some of these regulations, or at least influence them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I guess we can go on, but we said we would close at 8 o'clock, so we're way out of that. So we're way out of order. That's kind of a deregulation measure. But I think the discussion was really interesting, and I think it has to be pursued. So as mentioned before, this is kind of a step in a further thought process that could lead to publication. I thank everybody for the very nice contributions, for the people who have had the floor, but also the ones who raised questions and the listeners. And I wish you all a very nice evening. Thank you, and especially, yeah, that's it. Thank you. Bye.